In the immensity of a starless night, Joao found himself alone, driving his car along a forgotten highway, enveloped by an oppressive silence. Time seemed to have stopped, and the only sound was the rustling of dry leaves being dragged by the cold wind. The road stretched out in front of him endlessly, with no sign of life in sight. Once a welcome companion, it now emitted only static, intensifying the loneliness that was taking hold of Joao. The car lights cut through the darkness, revealing a desolate landscape where twisted trees whispered dark secrets. The dense fog enveloped the vehicle, creating illusions of dancing shadows in the periphery of his vision. Joao began to feel an indescribable presence, as if something were watching from the shadows. Fear grew within him, but he continued to advance, driven by a nervous curiosity. At a certain point, he saw a solitary figure at the side of the road. A woman in a faded white dress, long hair hiding her face. Her eyes, however, shone with an abnormal luminosity. A chill ran down his spine. Joao, when he hesitantly stopped the car, the woman got in silently, and silence reigned again, her gaze fixed forward, as if guided by invisible forces. Joao tried to talk, but his words seemed to get lost in the dark vastness of the environment. The woman pointed forward, indicating that he should continue. As they advanced, the landscape transformed into a distorted nightmare. Trees seemed to contort, shadows took on grotesque shapes. The inside of the car became suffocating, and Joao's breathing was ragged. The woman remained impassive, as if everything around her was normal. Desperate, Joao decided to end that strange journey, and asked the woman to get out. She waved slowly, she said, appearing in the darkness. But as the car advanced, a feeling of emptiness and despair took hold of Joao. The road seemed to have no end, and time stretched them like an infinite rubber. Now Joao continues his solitary odyssey, lost on that desolate road. The shadows seemed to whisper dark promises, and time that was already a distorted concept was completely lost. What awaits Joao at the end of that endless road? Only the shadows know. His destiny remains open, lost in the vastness of the eternal night. The desolate road stretched like a black serpent winding towards the unknown. John felt more and more trapped in a dark web, where time distorted and reality became an unattainable mirage. The interior of the car took on a suffocating atmosphere. The air became dense, and an indescribable presence seemed to hover over John. The radio, which had previously been static, now began to emit incomprehensible murmurs, as if distant voices were trying to communicate through the veil between worlds. The twisted trees formed dark tunnels, creating a feeling of claustrophobia. Shadows moved to the rhythm of the illusory light of the headlights, assuming grotesque shapes that seemed to stalk John. He tried to speed up to escape that endless road, but the vehicle seemed trapped in an eternal cycle. Suddenly, the woman in white reappeared in the passenger seat. Her eyes now shone brightly, emanating a light that seemed to tear away John's sanity. She reached out her hand, touching her face with a coldness that sucked the vitality. Her voice echoed like an ancient whisper, penetrating Joao's thoughts. Unintelligible words filled the space, echoing sinister promises and dark revelations. Each word seemed to dig claws into his mind, unraveling secrets he would rather not know. The car advanced in a downward spiral, the shadows dancing frantically. The distorted landscape transformed into a living nightmare where distorted shapes emerged from the darkness, laughing and whispering macabre secrets. Joao tried to scream, but his words disappeared in the vortex of horror around him. The woman in white, now a supernatural entity, smiled enigmatically, as if she were the guardian of a kingdom of nightmares. And so the desolate road devoured Joao, his being disintegrating in the darkness. The car slid into a bottomless abyss, plunging into a vacuum of shadows. The echo of distorted laughter resounded as the road absorbed everything. Joao's fate remains hidden in the bowels of this forgotten highway, now impregnated with its lost presence. The road continues to stretch out, eager for new souls brave enough to face the unknown. What awaits beyond the distorted horizon? Only the shadows know. The deep silence of the eternal night envelopes the road, and the nightmare continues, an unfinished narrative of horror beyond human comprehension. The night was a black cloak, only illuminated by the tireless headlights of my truck. I drove along secondary roads between unknown landscapes, cutting through dense forests and forgotten cities. As an experienced truck driver, it was not uncommon to travel these lonely stretches, but something about that night was out of the ordinary. The radio, Ava, as if trying to speak from a distant world, could barely tune into a station, and the silence around me was deafening. A feeling of unease took over me as if something was lurking in the shadows. That's when I spotted something on the side of the road, an indistinct figure, a human figure so distant that I could not discern details. I dismissed it as tiredness, an illusion caused by the exhaustion of the journey, but that mysterious presence seemed to persist, sometimes closer, sometimes disappearing into the darkness. An uncontrollable shiver ran down my spine, a feeling of growing fear. Even with the cabin warm, the radio began to emit strange sounds, loud static and disconnected murmurs. A feeling of terror grew inside me, the heightened senses on high alert. It was as if the universe was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand. Then the truck's headlights flashed and went out completely. I tried to brake, but the brakes seemed not to respond. The vehicle advanced uncontrollably down the dark road. A feeling of helplessness took over me. Suddenly a figure appeared in front of the windshield, an immense, indescribable shadow. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the void. Everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I was stopped at the side of the road. The headlights shone normally. The rain had stopped shaking. I looked around, but there was no sign of that figure. I turned the radio back on, but now everything was calm. The memory of that night haunting my mind forever. Was it a hallucination, or something beyond our understanding inhabits the roads at night, waiting for unsuspecting travelers? The fear still pulsed in me because I never discovered the true nature of what I encountered that night. Each turn now carries with it the specter of that experience. I don't know if I will ever find answers, or if I will continue to wander among the mystery and terror of the lonely roads of the night. The shadows of that night persist, a constant reminder that there are mysteries in this world that may never be revealed. That night haunted my thoughts, but life on the road did not stop. I continued my travels, each turn bringing with it the memory of that experience. However, something had changed in me. A constant restlessness accompanied me, as if I were connected to something beyond human comprehension. I decided to seek answers. I investigated local legend stories about cursed roads and supernatural encounters. I found vague accounts, testimonies that echoed my own experience, but nothing solid enough to dispel the mystery that haunted me. Each stop at gas stations, each conversation with other truckers was a search for clues. Some looked at me suspiciously, as if they knew more than they were willing to tell. Others just shook their heads, as if confirming my suspicions about the strangeness of the night roads. On a particularly dark night, while driving down a remote road, a familiar figure appeared at the side of the road. The shadow moved in the darkness, catching my attention. This time, instead of ignoring it, I stopped the truck, getting out of the cabin feeling a shiver run through my body. The figure approached slowly, revealing itself as a human figure, but something about it was not entirely earthly. There was no facial expression, just an emptiness. Dark. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice wavering. There was no answer, just an empty stare fixed on me. The fear that had previously dominated me began to give way to an intense curiosity, an eagerness to understand the inexplicable. Then the figure reached out his hand towards me. A reflex of fear made me take a step back, but something impelled me to reach out my own hand and touch. As it was as if time and space were distorted. A flood of images, sensations, and sounds flooded my mind. Glimpses of roads beyond human comprehension, of unknown horizons, and a cosmic vastness hit me like a whirlwind, and then everything dissipated. I found myself again at the side of the road. The figure was no longer there. My mind was cloudy, trying to understand what it has just happened. Since then, the night roads have taken on a new meaning. That mysterious encounter left me with more questions than answers. I continue my journey, but now I carry with me not only the memory of that haunted night, but also a thirst to unravel the hidden mysteries that lurk on the roads of eternity. At least, that was what I had thought before I saw myself dead on that same rainy night. My name is Marcia, and I want to share with you the story that changed my life. We decided to move to a small town in the interior of Sao Paulo, called Brotas, in search of a new beginning, and also to enjoy the tranquility and peace that existed there. It ended up being a very familiar place for me, because my maternal grandmother lived there. However, our adaptation to the new city was not easy, and one of the main concerns was getting a job. After saying goodbye to our dear grandmother, one of the greatest gifts we inherited was this beautiful house on a rural property. The sadness over her passing did not cease to ache our hearts, but this unexpected benefit brought a glimmer of hope. This particular house, with an old appearance, was located in an exquisite village outside the main urban areas. It was our refuge, embraced by natural beauty, with a garden full of fertile trees and multicolored flowers. After my grandmother passed away, we inherited the property located in the countryside that had been our grandmother's home for so many years. At that moment, we understood that it was the perfect time to change and leave behind the hustle and bustle of the big city. We thought our grandmother was guiding us on the right path, not knowing that this decision would lead us to a transformative encounter. Our intention was to get closer to our culture and roots, as well as enjoy the tranquility that the place provided. Now closer to our origins, we are full of peace and satisfaction. Getting a job at that snack bar near our house, located almost 4 kilometers away, was something incredible for me and my family. Although the salary was not ideal, I was very grateful for the possibility of contributing to the household expenses. It was a great blessing. The work environment was conducive, offering a feeling of security to everyone who entered, despite the effort required and the late departure time. I never stopped giving my best, although the extra salaries were nothing more than convenient. I did not complain. I tirelessly sought to acquire as much knowledge as possible to not only contribute to my family but also to enjoy the experience in that environment in the cafeteria. It didn't take long for me to become friends with the other waitresses there. They were welcoming and soon included me in the circle. During lunchtime, when we had a short break to get together, we used to tell stories and talk about the little town. One of my colleagues told me about the legend of the beggar, which is a feared legend in the region. This mysterious figure referred to a ragged woman who appears on the roads at night. She asks for alms, but more than a simple beggar, she is said to be a lost, disembodied spirit. It is believed that this supernatural entity roamed that region, and because of this scary tale, it generated fear among those who crossed the roads at night for the first time. The legend of the beggar was introduced to me. The thought of a lost soul wandering the road that I walked alone at night made me shudder. I tried to discredit the local superstitions as nonsense, but there was something in the way my friend mentioned the legend that left me with a feeling inexplicable. Could it be that it has any truth? I soon discovered that the path held many more mysteries than I could ever dream of. I admit in all honesty that I am someone who is afraid of paranormal phenomena. I have some apprehension regarding this type of subject, which is why I do not like to have it as a topic. After a few days, I had practically forgotten the story and left it behind, and to tell the truth, I did not want to know anymore. One night at work, the circumstances did not go as expected due to a larger than expected number of customers. I had to wait in the cafeteria for a while. Time seemed to drag on while we served the last and freeable customers. One night at work, the circumstances did not go as expected due to a larger than expected number of customers. I had to wait in the cafeteria for a longer time. Time seemed to drag on while we served the last and freeable customers. When I said goodbye to work, I realized that the bus that would take me home had left. The atmosphere was dark and silent. There was hardly any light except for a weak streetlight that illuminated the desolate road around me. I looked at the clock again and hoped that the bus was late, but I already knew that it wouldn't come back that night. The worst part was realizing that my friends had taken the bus to another neighborhood because they lived very far away. So I was alone, with no alternative to go back home. The distance from my house was 4 kilometers, and for me that walk seemed endless. Nothing around me was just darkness, which seemed to preserve the secrets of the night. There was no other way to go but to go back home. I knew it wouldn't be an easy journey, but what other option was there? Calm and absolute silence. My steps reverberated in the night. Fear grew stronger with every second. I felt so alone on that road. As I set foot on that road, tried not to look toward the entrance of the farm. The passage was surrounded by old, green trees. A shadowy quantity added to the darkness of that night. My heart was already pounding with fear and my legs were already shaking. When I reached the entrance of the place, I noticed something strange. There was a person huddled with their back to the road. Underneath a large tree, an old mango tree. I got goosebumps. My whole body went cold and I felt stunned. I couldn't believe that strange figure was there. Something certainly wasn't right. The place was so dark that it looked like something out of a horror story. I was startled to see a strange figure covered in filthy clothes that moved slowly in the shadows. His face couldn't be seen clearly, but when I caught the weak light of a street lamp, his eyes sparkled sinisterly. A feeling of anxiety took hold of me and I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. The fear was of such magnitude that I began to run out of breath, feeling stunned and nauseated. I felt my feet at the height of a panic attack. I cried out to God to free me from this evil that afflicted my soul. Looking down, I couldn't see anything, but I heard the sound of leaves in the distance. I kept walking and asking for someone to appear on the road, anyone who would give me a ride. After a few minutes that became an eternity, I finally finished passing through the cursed place. There was still a way to go back home, and I was still shaking. After a while, I looked back, but the road was silent again. And dark. I can't express how scared I was, but I managed to gather the strength to start crying. About 15 minutes a truck passed by me. It was a man who lived in the area who had a corn plantation. He seemed worried and asked if I was okay, and if anyone had hurt me. I could barely say anything. I was so stressed. He told me to get in and took me to my house. My parents were shocked to see my condition. I drank a glass of water. I managed to calm down and told them what had happened. At first, they didn't believe me, but my neighbor said that it wasn't the first time someone had seen spirits on that road. Some people laughed at me at work, but no one understood what I felt. I asked for termination because I didn't want to do any more tasks at night. My feeling was hard to describe. That shook me deeply, and even now when I think about it, I feel like crying. The night was dense and dark like endless pitch. When the truck shook under my feet, the wheels creaked on the deserted road, echoing a ghostly lament. The beam of light from the headlights cut through the darkness, revealing only brief glimpses of twisted trees and bushes that seemed to contort into sinister shapes. It was dawn, and I, Jose, an experienced truck driver, was fighting fatigue. The hours on the road weighed on my shoulders, but an urgent delivery kept me from stopping at my destination, in a small town nestled in the mountains, a place that gave me goosebumps just thinking about it. Suddenly a figure appeared on the road a few meters ahead. I pressed the brake hard, my heart pounding in my chest. The truck stopped abruptly, and I leaned over the steering wheel trying to contain the trembling in my hands. As I got out of the vehicle, my eyes came across something. I will never forget the creature, if you could call it that. It was humanoid, but with distorted proportions, its long and skeletal limbs bent at impossible angles, and the pale and translucent skin seemed to stretch over the deformed skull. Its large black eyes emanated a sinister light that chilled my blood. A guttural groan escaped the creature, a sound that sent shivers down my spine from head to toe. She moved toward me, dragging her bare feet across the asphalt. Terror paralyzed me, pinning me to the ground like prey in defense. I instinctively raised my hand to protect myself, and that was when I felt the most bizarre and disgusting thing. The creature touched my face with a wet, cold finger. Its skin was like rotten tissue, and a foul odor emanated from its body. I screamed at the top of my lungs, a scream that tore through the night and echoed in the mountains. In an instant, the creature dissolved into the darkness as if it had never existed. I fell to my knees, trembling and nauseated. The terror was so intense that I could barely breathe. It took me hours to recover and continue the journey, but the image of the creature has never been erased from my memory. To this day, I don't know what I saw that night. A hallucination caused by fatigue. A supernatural entity. Whatever the explanation, what I witnessed on that dark road left me marked forever. A trauma that I carry with me like a scar on my soul, eternally reminding me of the horror that hides in the shadows of the night. The journey continued in silence. Deafening the radio hissed, refusing to pick up any station. Fear had taken hold of me like a cold mist that clouds my thoughts. I arrived at the small town at dawn. It was a gray and depressing place, as if the landscape itself reflected the darkness I carried. I found the warehouse where I was supposed to make the delivery, but no one answered my calls. A strange restlessness hung in the air. The houses seemed abandoned, closed windows and dusty curtains. A skinny dog wandered the street barking. Hysterically, I decided to get out of there as quickly as possible. When I got back to the truck, I noticed something horrible on the asphalt next to the front tire. There was a bizarre symbol drawn, as if traced by a filthy claw. It reminded me of the distorted form of the creature I had seen. A shiver ran down my spine. I knew it wasn't over. I hitched the truck in gear. The rush became urgency, but when I started the engine, a deafening metallic noise took over the cabin. I jumped out, my heart beating wildly. The tires were all twisted at angles impossible, as if they had been bent by a supernatural force. A primal fear overcame me. I was trapped in that cursed city, with something holding me in the shadows. Night came, and with it, an oppressive silence inside the cabin. I looked at the symbol drawn on the road, feeling a terror that consumed me. Then I saw a movement, a skeletal silhouette approaching, dragging itself across the ground. It was A creature, but this time it was not alone more. Figures emerged from the darkness, all of them deformed, emanating a nauseating odor. They hit the body of the truck, their guttural moans cutting the air like razors. I do not know what happened that night. I only know that I woke up in the hospital days later with my body aching and my mind in tatters. The police dismissed my story, attributing everything to an outbreak of delirium, but I know what I saw. Those grotesque beings were real, and the mark on the road is the proof. Now I live tormented, trapped between reality and the nightmare. I do not know if I will ever hit the road again, but one thing is certain: the terror of that night haunts me, and the bizarre symbol on the road is a constant reminder of the horror that awaits me in the darkness. Time does not heal the wounds of the soul. Since that macabre night, I live in a state of constant paranoia. Every shadow, every noise is a cause for fear. The bizarre symbol on the road became an obsession. I returned to the place several times, looking for answers that I never found. The mark remained there intact, a cruel reminder of the horror I witnessed. I began to have vivid nightmares. The creature and its minions chased me through desolate landscapes, its moans echoing in my ears. I woke up in panic, with my body bathed in cold sweat. Reality mixed with fantasy, and the line that separated them became increasingly thin. One day, when passing by an old cemetery, I saw something that chilled my blood. Among the cracked tombstones and moss, there was a grave with the same bizarre symbol as the road. The name engraved on the tombstone was mine. Terror completely dominated me. The creature was chasing me not only in the real world, but also in my dreams. I was next. The paranoia turned into psychosis. Admitted to a hospital, psychiatric hospital, where I still live today. The doctors say I'm a lost cause, that my mind is irreparably damaged, but I know the truth: the creature is out there waiting for me, and when I get out of here, it will be ready to take me to its kingdom of eternal horror. The dense fog swallowed the road like a hungry monster, devouring the light of twilight and leaving me immersed in a blanket of impenetrable darkness. The headlights of my old Ford trembled, casting weak beams that barely penetrated the thick mist. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the roar of the engine and the rustling of dry leaves under my tires. It was late at night, and I was driving down a lonely road that wound through the mountains of the south. I had decided to make the journey alone, ignoring the warnings of my friends about the dangers of that route. Cursed road, they said, haunted by the ghost of a vengeful woman. I laughed at the superstitions, considering myself a rational and fearless man, but as I delved deeper into the darkness, rationality began to fade. An inexplicable chill invaded my bones, and at every turn of the road the feeling of being watched intensified. Suddenly, a white figure appeared in the mist, floating in the air like a ghost. It was a woman with a white dress, flowing long black hair that covered her face. She stared at me with empty and icy eyes, and a shrill scream tore through the air. In terror, I stepped on the accelerator, but the car didn't respond. The wheels spun, falsely digging mud on the side of the road. I was trapped. The woman approached, her silent steps like death itself. The snow dissipated around her, revealing her pale face and empty eyes. She raised a bony hand and pointed at me, and an indescribable horror took over my being. In a flash of lucidity, I recognized the woman. It was my beloved wife, Sophia, who had died in a car accident on that same road 5 years ago. Guilt overcame me like a fist of ice. I blamed her for her own death, for leaving me alone with our little daughter. Sophia came even closer, and I could see the deep sadness in her empty eyes. She was not a ghost vengeful, but rather a soul in pain, trapped on earth by pain and guilt. Tears welled up in my eyes as I begged for forgiveness. Suddenly, the image of Sophia dissolved into thin air, leaving only an immense void in its place. The fog once again took over the road, and silence settled in again. I was alone, but no longer afraid. The pain of loss was still there, but now accompanied by a feeling of peace and understanding. I got out of the car and walked down the road, guided by a dim light that shone on Anya. The light led me to a small cemetery where I found Sophia's grave. I knelt down next to the tombstone and touched the cold stone with my fingers. At that moment, I felt Sophia's presence by my side, wrapping me in a warm and comforting embrace. I never drove down that lonely road again, but Sophia's memory always accompanies me. I know she is at peace now, free from the pain and guilt that had taken hold of the earth, and I finally found peace in my heart. The relief was short-lived. The next morning, the news hit me like a punch in the stomach. A fire had consumed my house during the night. My daughter Clara did not resist the flames. The pain, the guilt crushed me, returning with devastating force. Sophia had not forgiven me. After all, it was the final punishment for losing her daughter, just as she had lost her own life. Days later, back on that cursed road, this time for Clara's funeral. The fog surrounded me again, but this time there was no ghost. White floating, there was a grotesque figure, a twisted amalgam of bones and shadows, emanating a putrid odor. The distorted form mocked me with a hoarse, harsh voice. "You blamed her," Grandma hissed. "Now she's taking everything from you." The terror paralyzed me. The creature approached. The nauseating stench almost suffocated me. And then she transformed. The bones took shape. The trembling shadow fell and the terrifying form disappeared. Sophia's face, but not the sad, peaceful Sophia I had heard in the cemetery. It was a monstrous parody. The white dress was torn and burned. The face was deformed by hatred. The empty eyes now shone with the ground. Hellish flames. She pointed a long, bony finger at me. And this time the voice that came out of her mouth was that of my little Clara, childish and terrified daddy. And why did the revelation hit me with the force of lightning? It wasn't a ghost of vengeance, it was a malevolent entity feeding on my guilt, and my pain. Sophia couldn't have done that. Sophia loved me. The monstrosity advanced, laughing with the voice of a demon. I ran, but my legs felt stuck in the mud. The lonely road echoed with my scream of despair, a scream that was lost in the dense fog that was the last act of sanity. I had left. The rest is a blur of pain, confusion, and fear. I don't know how I escaped, but of one thing I am sure, and the lonely road showed me true horror, the personification of eternal guilt and pain, and left me with a terrible question: was I the only one punished, or is Sophia trapped in that place with me, condemned to watch my madness? I live now as a hermit, tormented by the echoes of Clara's voice and the image of Sophia's monstrosity. The lonely road became my recurring nightmare, a constant reminder of what I lost, of what my guilt unleashed on me. Sometimes on a moonless night, I swear I see lights flashing in the distance like a car's headlights, and a shiver runs down my spine, hope fighting against fear. Maybe it's Sophia, finally free from the influence of the entity, coming to get me for whatever awaits us on the other side, but I know it. South, unlikely. The cursed road stole everything from me, including the chance for redemption. My punishment is life, tormented by the ghost of what I could have avoided. Whatever Sophia's fate, mine is sealed in that dense fog, trapped forever in the web of my own remorse.